This episode of the CyberWire is made possible in part by Strata Technologies. Strata is the first strategic intelligence tool built to help companies, government agencies, and research institutions protect their innovation and compete in a new era of global strategic competition. With trillions of open-source data points, Strata's technology and intelligence solutions enable you to proactively identify, manage, and respond to state-sponsored intellectual property theft and supply chain risks. Learn how to secure your technology talent and supply chains at striderintel.com. A hostile takeover of the Solaris contraband market. Ukraine warns that Russian cyberattacks continue. An overview of the second half of 2022 ICS vulnerabilities. Codespace accounts can act as malware servers. Blank image attacks. Campaigns leveraging HR policy themes. Dinah Davis from Arctic Wolf has tips for pros for security at home. Our guest is Gerry Gebel from Strata Identity to describe a new open-source standard that aims to unify cloud identity platforms. And travel-themed phishing increases. From the CyberWire studios at Data Tribe, I'm Dave Bittner with your CyberWire summary for Thursday, January 19th, 2023. Happy Thursday to you all. It is great to have you here with us today. Researchers at Elliptic report that, as they put it, Friday the 13th was unlucky for the bad guys over at Solaris. Solaris is one of the biggest dark web drug markets, a principal successor to the old Hydra market, which was taken down in April of 2022. Last week, the rival dark web market Kraken, which has no connection with the legitimate cryptocurrency exchange of that name, compromised and took control of Solaris. Elliptic explains, Kraken attributed its successful takeover to poor operational security by Solaris admins, allowing the hack to take place over 3 days without notice. Logs apparently confirming Kraken's full control of Solaris were also shared. There's been bad criminal blood between Solaris and Kraken for some time, and there are signs that some of Solaris's criminal customers have also been dissatisfied with service they've received from the market. Both Solaris and Kraken are based in Russia. There's therefore a wartime angle to the story, and it suggests that criminal rivalries among Russian gangs have endured through their recruitment as cyber auxiliaries of the Russian security and intelligence services. Solaris is associated with the Killnet Patriot hacktivist group, which has become the most prominent Russian cyber auxiliary. Kraken is reckoned to be pro-Kremlin as well, but that hasn't inhibited it from taking a whack at its rival. The ineffectuality of Russia's cyber operations against Ukraine have been surprising. As we've had occasion to note, they've fallen short of the expectations set during half a decade of pre-war cyber attacks against Ukrainian infrastructure. But Ukraine wants to warn the rest of the world that the danger, while for now successfully being contained, isn't over. The Guardian reports that Viktor Zora of Ukraine's State Service of Special Communication and Information Protection is visiting Britain's GCHQ this week and has said that Russian cyber attacks have tripled over the past year and continue at a high rate. Interestingly, he said that in some cases, cyber attacks supportive to kinetic effects have been seen. That is, Ukraine seen signs that Russia is attempting to integrate cyber operations and information operations with missile strikes and action on the ground. Mr. Zora's remarks are consistent with a report his agency issued earlier this week titled Cyberattacks, Artillery, Propaganda, General Overview of the Dimensions of Russian Aggression. The report stresses signs that Russian attempts at coordinated operations have increased, that Russian targeting has been not just indiscriminate, but directed specifically and directly against civilians as part of an intentional campaign of terror. The document also makes the case that Russian cyber operations can amount to war crimes and that they probably have already done so. The cyber attacks have generally been parried by Ukrainian defenses, but they remain an enduring threat. The report ends with a call for more international cooperation against cyber attacks, whether by Russia or other authoritarian regimes, and notes the value of considering those states' military doctrine in forecasting their probable courses of action in cyberspace. It calls for international recognition of the ways in which cyber operations can constitute either crimes against peace or war crimes, and it urges an expansion and tightening of economic sanctions against Russia. Whether nation-state attacks against industrial control systems rise or not, it's worth taking stock of the known vulnerabilities and mitigating them insofar as that's feasible within a reasonable risk management framework. SynSaber has published a report looking at ICS vulnerabilities cataloged by the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency in the second half of 2022. The researchers found that 35% of vulnerabilities disclosed in the second half of 2022 don't currently have a patch available, and 33% will require a firmware update. Additionally, 43% of vulnerabilities were discovered by security researchers rather than the equipment manufacturers. The researchers also note that 22% of the vulnerabilities require local or physical access to the system in order to exploit. Researchers at Trend Micro have found that GitHub Codespaces, a cloud-based IDE that was released in November 2022, can be abused to create a trusted malware file server. The issue lies in Codespaces' ability to share forwarded ports publicly, which allows developers to preview their projects as an end user. The researchers write, "We investigated the services offered by this cloud IDE and found that one of its features for code development and collaboration, sharing forwarded ports publicly, can be abused by malicious actors to create a malware file server using a legitimate GitHub account. In the process, these abused environments will not be flagged as malicious or suspicious even, as it searches malicious content, such as scripts, malware, and ransomware, among others, and organizations may consider these events as benign or false positives." The researchers explain that attackers can easily abuse GitHub Codespaces in serving malicious content at a rapid rate by exposing ports publicly on their Codespace environments. Trend Micro also notes that they haven't seen this technique used in the wild yet, but as a proof of concept, it's worth preparing for. Abnormal Security released research this morning on phishing attacks purporting to be from internal HR departments with policy updates in the new year. One of the attacks, a payload-based credential phishing attack, claims to be from the victim's company human resources department, informing them of updates to benefits packages. The email asks for the review of an updated handbook, which would lead to a credential harvesting login page imitating Microsoft. And finally, as people return to travel as the pandemic ebbs, criminals are returning as well. Bitdefender has published a report looking at the prevalence of travel-themed phishing scams. The researchers found that 60% of all travel-themed emails sent between December 20th and January 10th were phishing attacks. Most of the attacks observed by Bitdefender targeted English-speaking users. They say, particularly, spammers push their travel-themed lures on English-speaking recipients, with 53% of correspondents targeting U.S. inboxes. The U.S. is followed by Ireland, India, the U.K., and South Africa. Germany trails at only 4%. Many of the scams impersonate airlines, including Southwest Airlines, Ryanair, Lufthansa, Air France, and American Airlines. These scams are designed to gain access to travel rewards and loyalty accounts. Bitdefender says, airline loyalty programs are highly desired digital assets for cybercriminals as they contain a wide variety of personally identifiable information on travelers and airline points that can be monetized on the dark web. So, travelers, you know what they say. Keep your friends close, your enemies closer, and your loyalty programs closest of all. Pretty sure that's how they say it. Coming up after the break, Dinah Davis from Arctic Wolf has tips for pros for security at home. Our guest is Gerry Gebel from Strata Identity on a new open source standard that aims to unify cloud identity platforms. Stick around. Hey everybody, Dave here. Are your sales and marketing teams tasked with ever-growing brand awareness and lead gen goals? The CyberWire is a great way to put your message into the ear of decision makers across cyber and help fill your funnel. We have great sponsorship opportunities available, but we're filling up fast. Contact our team now to learn more about how sponsorship of the CyberWire can help build your business at thecyberwire.com/sponsor. And now, a word from our sponsor, SpyCloud, the cybercrime analytics leader. SpyCloud disrupts cybercrime by telling you what criminals know about your business and your customers, so you can take action to prevent ransomware, account takeover, and online fraud. SpyCloud constantly recaptures and analyzes new data from the criminal underground, including credentials, cookies, and PII siphoned from malware-infected devices. With knowledge of the specific data criminals have in hand from InfoStealer malware on managed and unmanaged devices, security teams can respond with a more efficient and effective process called post-infection remediation. Get SpyCloud's post-infection remediation guide outlining the 7 steps for preventing a malware infection from becoming a full-blown ransomware incident. Visit spycloud.com/cyberwire. That's spycloud.com/cyberwire. And we thank SpyCloud for sponsoring our show. Multi-cloud adoption continues to grow, with some reports indicating that the majority of organizations are making use of more than one public cloud service. This opens the potential for security and risk management challenges, since each of the cloud providers uses their own proprietary identity system and policy language. Gerry Gebel is head of standards at Strata Identity, where they're leading an open-source industry standards initiative called IDQL, Identity Query Language, and Hexa Orchestration.
So some of our founders and early management team, they were part of SAML, the Security Assertion Markup Language, from back in the early 2000s. That was one of the first standards for federated identity, so you could have single sign-on across different application domains. And so there's a lot of history and DNA within the company here to really not only embrace standards, but really support them in a significant way. And as the founders began Strata as an identity orchestration company that deals with identity across domains, primarily authentication, but other aspects as well, in a multi-cloud environment, they realized that if you take it one step farther and look at access policies across a multi-cloud kind of environment, they realized there's no standard there. Every platform, it seems like every implementation of an application has its own way of doing access policy. So that was the genesis or the motivation for coming up with IDQL, or Identity Query Language, is an attempt to standardize or normalize that access policy across a multi-cloud environment where IDQL can be the single point of definition of access policy. And then we use the Hexa open source software to translate that IDQL format into the format of the target or bespoke system.
And you have quite a number of folks on board here who have joined this effort.
That's right. We have a mix of vendors and end users that are part of the working group at the moment, and a number of individual contributors as well.
Can you give us some insights as to some of the technical challenges that go on behind the scenes here? I'm just thinking with the variety of cloud providers out there, they all have their own proprietary standards here. it must be a bit of a puzzle to get them all to work.
That is that is spot on. It's it's definitely a big challenge. If it was easy, anyone could do it, right? And it's also why it's a big commitment to really bootstrap this effort. We started the middle of last year and started looking at what's the right architecture for such a system, and then we took the three main cloud platforms and started with them. And in each case, it's a lot of research, looking into the APIs that are available for managing policy. It's not about managing users, but managing roles and groups and policy formats. A lot of research into those, to that documentation and those APIs. And then on the software development side, again, trying to experiment, do a lot of trial and error to get things working the way we want them to. So that gives you a sense of some of the challenges we've come across, and also that they are so different, right? Each platform, if you look again just at the main three cloud platform providers, each of their APIs is so different, and they have a similar but different mix of technical capabilities up and down the stack, whether you're talking about the IDP, the identity provider functionality, or how you authenticate, to various kinds of proxies that can sit in front of applications. And yes, it's a complex mix, but we're trying to take chunks that we can solve and work on them and just make continuous progress. That's been our approach so far.
Yeah, I would imagine along the way, making sure that you're not introducing any security issues on your own.
That's quite true, and this is where I think the CNCF model is very helpful. We're a sandbox project at CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and they really emphasize the security aspect. So we're doing code scans, we're doing vulnerability scans, and as well as staying up to date on any vulnerabilities that might affect the different components that we are working with. Because you're absolutely right. We're dealing with the access policies to sensitive or valuable resources. So we don't want to introduce a new vector of attack in our work.
You mentioned that despite Strata having a leadership role in this effort, this isn't a product. This is an open industry standard. Why is Strata choosing to invest in this, just to spend time in this project for the greater community?
Yeah, well, we made the decision pretty early on when we decided to tackle this challenge that it's something that was bigger than just a commercial product that Strata could introduce. So we felt it was more valuable to contribute this to the industry rather than just to make another commercial product to address it. So that that was the basic motivation. Not a whole lot more to say to that. Which we just thought it was bigger than Strata itself.
That's Gerry Gebel from Strata Identity. And I'm pleased to be joined once again by Dinah Davis. She is the VP of R&D Operations at Arctic Wolf. Dinah, it's always great to welcome you back to the show. I want to touch base with you. I saw you and your colleagues there at Arctic Wolf had a blog post recently about improving your security posture at your home. I think this is something worth visiting here. What do you got to share with us today?
Yeah, I mean, we often think about hackers trying to come at a company like through company resources, right? But they're really going to try from every angle possible. And one popular way that they've been making progress is through people's personal accounts, right? So even if we look at the May Cisco breach, the hacker there gained access to the employee's personal Google email account. This was really interesting. It wasn't just that they reset passwords and stuff, but once they did that, they were able to get into their Chrome browser password store and extract all the passwords from there. One of which was really bad. which was the VPN access to their work, which like people, your VPN access, any work password should never be in a personal password store anyway, full stop. But again, this is why maybe using a Chrome browser or the Safari key password store is not a great idea. Having things separated makes it harder.
Well, let's go through some of the things that really caught your eye here. What are some of the ones that rise to the top of your attention?
So you want to use VPNs as much as possible, right? So if you're at home, in a coffee shop, or anywhere that is not the office, you could be subject to a man-in-the-middle attack, which is when somebody is able to pretend they're actually your home Wi-Fi or the coffee shop Wi-Fi and give you access to the internet through that, but see everything you're typing. So if that happens, if you're using a VPN, what a VPN is going to do is encrypt all the data going through. And so even if you are in the middle of a man-in-the-middle attack, wow, that's some inception right there, you're going to be fine, right? So those are really important. Also using MFA, multi-factor authentication, right? So even if they got his whole password store, if he'd have had MFA or a second factor authentication, it still would have been hard for them to get in, right?
Right. I remember seeing a study from Google, it was probably a year ago now, where they said that people who put MFA on their Gmail accounts don't get hacked. Like it wasn't like 90%, it was like 100%. If you have a hardware key, you're probably good to go.
Yeah, because I liken it back to when I grew up. I grew up in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, and it happens to be the car theft capital of Canada, or it was in the 90s. Let's put it that way. I have no idea if it still is. Okay.
Right.
And so what we used to do is we had this thing called the club. And it was like this metal bar that you put across your steering wheel and you locked it, and it made it so you couldn't turn the wheel. So even if they hotwired your car, they couldn't turn that wheel. Now, could they still get that off with like a massive saw or something like that? Sure, they could. But if they're going down the street looking into the driver's seats of all the cars, the ones with the clubs aren't going to get hit because it's just too much work. Right? And I think that's the same principle that's happening when you put MFA on your accounts, right? You've made it harder. Unless they really, really want you for a very specific reason, they're not going to bother, right? Here's a good one that I failed at recently. Secure your physical devices. So that means do not leave things on airplanes.
I feel like there's a story here.
Yeah, I might have just done that recently. It was very annoying.
Oh no.
If you leave it on an airplane while it's in airplane mode, it's very hard to get to. But here's a good thing to do. Make sure you set up that emergency contact on the front of the phone, because it will turn the airplane mode off when they call you for 24 hours, and you can get the device wipe in Find Your Phone, Google, or iPhone in there. So it does happen. I wasn't worried when I lost my phone because I have all the passwords set. I have MFA on my Google accounts. I was able to reach my phone and security wipe it. So it's not an issue, but it's still not something I would have liked to do in the future.
Yeah.
I don't think I'll ever do that again. But when you're running for a connection, sometimes it's easy to misplace some things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, leave that in that pocket in the front of the seat next to you. I mean, it brings up a good point that I've heard people say when you're traveling, which is not to put all of your electronic eggs in one basket. In other words, you have your mobile device and it gets lost. You need to have another device to be able to go and try to change whatever settings you need to on that original device.
100%. So, I was able to log into my computer that I also had with me and, get the device wipe. And then, until I got my phone back, I was able to use my iPad for the key store. I was so happy that I had a authenticator that backed up into the cloud. So, Google Authenticator. I use a different one. I use the one that LastPass uses.
Yeah.
And so you can back it up into your LastPass account. I'm very careful not to use the same password keeper app. So I use 1Password for my passwords and LastPass for my authenticator. So they're in two separate systems entirely. But I was able to, pull that all up on my iPad and relive. So I had very little disruption to my life other than not being able to receive text messages while the phone was lost, and, kept going, and I wasn't really worried.
All right. Well, good tips for sure. Dinah Davis, thanks for joining us. Thanks to all of our sponsors for making the CyberWire possible. Find out more about sponsoring our programs at thecyberwire.com/sponsor. And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, check out our daily briefing at thecyberwire.com. The CyberWire podcast is a production of N2K Networks, proudly produced in Maryland out of the startup studios of Data Tribe, where they're co-building the next generation of cybersecurity teams and technologies. This episode was produced by Liz Irvin and senior producer Jennifer Eiben. Our mixer is Trey Hester, with original music by Elliot Peltzman. The show was written by John Petrick. Our executive editor is Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
Hey everybody, Rick here. If you're anything like me, you hate commercials. So subscribe to CyberWire Pro and get all of our public podcasts ad-free, as well as our exclusive CyberWire Pro podcasts, briefings, articles, events, and bonus content. Designed for the busy professional, CyberWire Pro cuts through the noise and disinformation, giving you access to actionable reporting, trends, analysis, and insight on global events occurring in the industry, all at your fingertips. Subscribe to CyberWire Pro today for only $9.99 a month, or save with an annual subscription for only $99. That is well worth it to get rid of all of those commercials. Visit thecyberwire.com/pro to subscribe today.